I've stood outside the house where he grew up. I've stood on the stage with him. I've listened to his music by myself. I've listened to his music with the people that I love the most in this world. And through it all, I feel like he's a part of me in ways that I will never, ever be able to explain.
Hello, and welcome to the Untitled Gen X podcast, a podcast dedicated to the pop culture that raised us. I'm Lori, a writer and pop culture lover who's stoked to welcome my friend, Serge Bielanko, to gush all over the heavy grace and poetry of Bruce Springsteen's 1984 triumph, Born in the U.S.A. But before we get into the masterpiece itself, I'd like to tell you a little about Serge. He's a man who's lived a whole lot of life. Writer, rock star, loving husband, devoted father, American Civil War enthusiast, lifelong Springsteen fan, and cool rockin' daddy in the USA. Welcome to the podcast, Serge.
Thanks so much, Lori. It's really cool to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you, specifically to talk about Bruce Springsteen. I told you offline I needed a true fan to come on and help me with this one. And so thank you for taking the time.
Hey, you know what? I'm really excited, and there's no other artist on earth for me that would be such an honor to be called a true fan for. So I think you got the right guy. I'm really going to try hard.
I know I got the right guy. In fact, I know I got the right guy because I want to talk about a little post I saw on your personal Facebook. You wrote a post June 4th, 2019, about the 35th anniversary of Born in the USA. And I would like you to read that post for the listeners, because I think it's important for them to get a true sense of what Bruce and particularly this album has meant to your heart over the years.
Happy 35th to one of the most important things that ever happened to me, and to a lot of kids like me. I was 13 the year this album dropped, a chunky kid in the American suburbs, part baseball, part mongoose, part Bolero's pizza. I had lust inside of me I did not understand, and a yearning desire to be someone even though I could see the writing on the proverbial wall, dude. I was probably bound for mundanity. I would probably even die from it someday. But Bruce's songs here connected with me in a way that nothing had ever hit me before. Suddenly I caught my first whiff of regular life and of the poetry she reeks of. I never looked back. No one who fell in love with Springsteen around that time did. Some of us were just kids that summer of 1984. And when I dropped the needle on this one, I could suddenly feel the sun shining on my young man's skin again. Me standing at third base, me looking out the ocean from the boardwalk, me playing air guitar in the mirror to No Surrender, the goosebumps running up and down my spine like I was born to fake singing that song, a tennis racket guitar in my hands. I listened to it on the ride home from work tonight, windows down, hair blowing back like Stevie Nicks, Diet Coke in my veins. Fuck the world. And you know what? The goosebumps are still exactly the goddamn same.
Ooh. Okay, so I saw that and that just got me right in the heart. And I felt every word of that. I believed you.
It's true.
You know, I have to be honest with you. So this album came out in 1984. And I remember my dad had the vinyl and he used to play it. And at that time, I mean, I was 8. I was obsessed with Madonna. Mm-hmm. Bruce didn't really speak to me in that way. And in preparation for this episode, I went back and I know Springsteen singles. I'm not, someone that knows like the deeper cuts. I went back to listen to this album and it has been on repeat. And I felt like for the first time, I got it.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think that's not unusual with great albums in general. Mm-hmm. And I would say as a huge Springsteen fan, it's certainly not unusual with Bruce's work to be able to revisit it over and over again at different times, and perhaps to have it hit you much later after you first heard it, harder than it's ever hit you. That continues to happen for me as well. So getting it at 8 years old certainly wouldn't be the same as getting it now, and I feel lucky to have tapped into somebody like him that has that kind of presence in my life, repeatedly presenting the work, and it just continues to blow my mind.
I mean, it really is a true gift, isn't it? To have an album that really speaks to your heart, that continues to give back to you year after year, depending on what's going on in your life, what you're going through, the good times, the bad times. It's always teaching you something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's so powerful. And so to listen to Born in the USA and to think like, wow, there is so much to this album I never knew. There's like I don't even know how to explain it, because in many of the songs, Bruce is shouting, Bruce means it. And then in other songs, it's almost a quiet whisper. Mm-hmm. And there's so much in the quality of his voice. Yes, the words, obviously, you're a writer, I'm a writer. Words are very important to us, but it's been like a journey for me in a surprising way. I wasn't expecting to feel this way, and I do. And so now I'm inspired to check out more of his work, particularly Nebraska.
That is an incredible record. It's obviously one of his masterpieces. I believe he has several. Most people tend to sort of if you think of Bruce's whole catalog, you usually have 2 or 3 records that are your favorites, and mm-hmm. Nebraska is almost always one. But you can't go wrong, I think, with any artist in any capacity if it suddenly moves you unexpectedly, especially, and then you can kind of go digging in their bucket, so to speak, and uncover all of this treasure. To me, it's one of the most beautiful things in life is to either rediscover or discover for the first time. I'm pushing 50 in a couple months, and I'm still discovering bands for the first time. I can't keep up like I used to.
Right. Are you talking like older bands, or are you talking newer music?
Sure. I discover older stuff as much as I discover newer stuff, Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, I'm more intimidated by newer music, I think. So if somebody comes to me and, if one of my kids are, 9 and 12 and talk to me about XXXTentacion and all these different, I'm like, man, I want to wrap my head around this, but I don't know if I can, or if I even should try, because in a way it's yours, this is yours. And that's just like the same. I don't try and push Springsteen on them, but I hope by osmosis it will trickle down. But
it most definitely will. I promise you. I'm one of the biggest Elton John fans in the universe. He's my go-to. I love all things 70s music. It's just what I gravitate toward. Mm-hmm. And my parents were fans. And so here I am. And when it comes to like newer music and stuff, my kids are really into rap and newer artists. And I'm sort of like, And Elton John actually collaborates with a lot of newer artists. He's really good about that. So in like a weird way, he's introducing me to new music.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I feel safe with Elton John. Like he's my safe space.
Absolutely. And, I think that's a really good point. And I think even with Bruce Springsteen, at times in my life, I've read interviews with him and he'll mention something here or there that I hadn't known about, and right away, I'm really hungry then to hunt that down. That's one of the cool things, I think, again, if you can trust the artist that make the music that you really, really love, if you can trust them at that level to say, hey, lead me even beyond your own work. And I think that's a huge part of almost every musician's life is sort of digging beyond the records that they love to find where the inspiration came from.
Yeah. And so when we talk about your relationship to Bruce Springsteen, this obviously started at a very young age for you, but Alan Carr once said you should never meet your heroes, but you did. Not only did you meet Bruce, you had the opportunity to perform with him. And just to give the listeners a little more background on you, Serge, you're in a band called Mara that was formed in the early 90s alongside your brother. And I actually encourage everyone to pause the pod, go to Spotify, check out Mara. Fantastic music. If you are a Bruce fan, you will most definitely be a Mara fan. In 2016, Rolling Stone did a profile on Mara titled How Mara Made the Best Americana Album You've Never Heard. And it goes on to say, Mara developed a relationship for sweat-soaked live shows akin to those of their mentor, Bruce Springsteen. who invited the siblings to perform with him on stage at Giant Stadium in 2003. Okay, that's got to feel surreal. Can you tell me a little about that experience?
Sure. Yeah, it was definitely surreal, but also one of the greatest nights of my life, quite frankly. And I played a lot of music across, half my life, really. From the time I was 24, we toured a lot. I've met a lot of people in music. I've met a lot of cool people that no one's ever heard of before. Some of the greatest bands I've ever seen are bands that sort of fly under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
But Bruce Springsteen was the one exception, was the one person that, had been kind of the center of my cultural solar system since I was a kid, since I was like 12 years old. And so we did kind of get to meet him through different channels. And when we put our second record out, I think is around the time when it kind of amped up a little bit. And it sort of culminated at one point with him telling my brother and I to, he handed us these passes and he's like, these are good for, whenever. And I looked at my brother and I'm like, does he mean whenever, like any show, like we could just show up?
What does it mean?
And it was, to two kids from suburban Philly who had grown up loving this guy. I mean, it was literally like, I still love Christmas time and Santa Claus, but it was like Santa was like, listen, man, here's the reins to the sleigh. And let's go. Let's go out together.
That's a golden ticket, Serge. So few people in life get to have that experience. And when you're in it, when you're on stage and you're performing with Bruce Springsteen, are you thinking to yourself, oh my God, I'm on stage performing with Bruce Springsteen? Or are you like completely out of your head and your body and you're not even really there?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, you can't I could have easily gone completely out of my head. And then I probably wouldn't have remembered it like I do. I was really, really conscious of the fact that this is quite possibly never going to happen again. And I need to remember this. I need to really freeze this moment as best I can.
Yes.
But that said, you're up there and I'm not lying, Lori, I will sit by myself with a glass of wine in the evening and try and recall, exactly what it was like. And, like anything else, it begins to fade here and there. But the overall gist of it, I still do recount, impeccably. And yeah, it was, I don't know what Giant Stadium holds, 75, 80,000 people. It's a lot of people. And what struck me probably the most was that, I had played music at that point every night of my life in some small bar somewhere.
Right.
And we play really loud. Our band is a rock and roll band, and we just play loud rock and roll in a bar. And I stepped out on that stage and Bruce, kicked into the song and I was like, man, it sounds like I'm listening to this on my car stereo, halfway up. It's not even that loud at all up there.
Wow.
So you could really, if I had wanted to, I could have just started talking to him right there in the middle of the song. That's
right.
So that struck me as something that, and for whatever reason, I recall that forever. Now these days I'm partially deaf because of my, years in music.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, I feel like, the details of that experience, like you said, they begin to fade over time, but the feeling, the energy of that moment stays with you. And that's what really matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so performing was just part of your experience with Bruce. He also played guitar and provided vocals on Marat's song Float Away from your 2002 album, Float Away with the Friday Night Gods. Mm-hmm. So were you actually in studio with him?
Well, we weren't. And again, it's sort of a long story. We were recording that record in the country of Wales.
Oh, okay.
So we were back and forth with Bruce. We really wanted him to be on this particular song. And a funny story I could tell you is that we were sitting in the courtyard of this very famous studio where you can live called Rockfield in Wales. And we were sitting in the courtyard one day and it's this bright British afternoon and staring at this phone, and it wasn't a cell phone, it was a landline. It was stretched out of the studio and it was sitting on this little table by itself, and it was a phone that we knew that Bruce was due to call any minute now, you know.
Oh, shit. So it's like a bat phone.
Yeah, it was kind of like the bat phone.
Okay.
And it was pretty awesome to be there sitting, and, you know, we were smoking our cigarettes and drinking our coffee. We were very nervous, and,
Yes.
you know, we knew him a bit at this point, but again, I had to freeze myself in that time and say, I'm probably never going to be staring at a phone that I know that Springsteen is about to call again.
Oh,
You know?
God. You're like, be cool. Just be cool.
And the phone ultimately rang, and we all looked at each other. We were kind of cheering and fist bumping, and then my brother had to answer it. He got chosen to answer the phone, and it was Bruce Springsteen on the other end, you know. And so we set it up, and we ended up recording in New York City. He was really generous with his time. You know, I can't say enough about the guy personally. He's just an awesome human being. You know, he went way out of his way to be friendly and cool, and not just kind to us, but like really made me feel like a brother or something every single time I was around him. And, you know, for somebody like, I grew up without a dad, you know what I mean?
Okay,
And there were times when I was like, man, I might ask Bruce if he wants this gig, you know, like if he wants to be old Serge's dad. Because,
Right.
But yeah, it was just a real pleasure to know him and to experience, you know, the recording process was really fun. We did everything we needed him to do in a matter of a couple hours. And then he spent the entire day with us. We went bar hopping around Manhattan. We went to an Italian restaurant for dinner.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he's a really good person. And I can say this, I know that we are not the only band or unheard of artist or whatever that he's ever done that with. He's just, you know, if he gets any sort of, I don't know what it is, but if he has any idea that you're someone that he could sort of relate to musically and soulfully or whatever, then I think that he might go for it.
You know, and the fact that he is tapped into musicians who are true fans. He's tapped into music on maybe the local bar and club scene that's playing smaller venues. The fact that he wants to be a part of a band's journey, that really says something about him as a performer, as an artist, as a true lover of music.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think he's ever, and it sounds cliche, but I just don't think he's ever forgotten where he's come from. And I think he's almost made it his sort of parallel life's work along with his music to remember where he comes from, and to remember to give back quite humbly and quite quietly in his own way. You know, he doesn't want any, honestly, like this is probably the most I've ever talked about this, except maybe to people at a bar or something, you know, because it felt very sacred, and it still does. It's not the kind of thing where it's like, and I like it. I like talking and telling people about it just so that they understand while he's still alive and he's still with us, what a great dude he is, you know?
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Serge. That means a lot. I'm so happy that people can hear about Bruce the man, Bruce the mentor, Bruce the man.
That's my gospel. I will preach it until I'm dead.
Nice. Okay, so do you want to talk about the album?
Let's do it.
All right. So this was released on June 4th, 1984. It was Bruce's 7th studio album. I was surprised to learn that. So I suspect that you are very familiar with his catalog. Had you listened to everything up till this point when you were a kid, and maybe your introduction to Bruce was this album, but did you immediately go back into his earlier works?
Yeah. So I grew up in just outside Philadelphia. So I grew up with the radio, and Philadelphia was one of the very first places in the world that sort of embraced Bruce Springsteen. You know, we had some DJs, a guy called Ed Shockey, who is a legend. And Ed was one of the first persons to play Philadelphia, or to play Bruce in Philadelphia. And so I was kind of lucky in that his music was already a part of the lay of the land, you know, as I was growing up. So I think in a lot of ways, Born in the USA kicked down every single door possible for him, and his music became instantly accessible. But in a strange sort of, I guess, selfish way, I feel like we had him first.
I get that. Yeah.
You know, we're from Philly, and he was ours. But and so that there's always a special connection. And I think even if you ask Bruce, I would think he would say, yeah, Philly was always a special place for me. But looking to 1984, at that point, MTV was a couple years old. MTV had landed like, a massive UFO in the middle of my town, in the middle of anybody's town. And it just shot out its lasers and got us all, I was hooked. And so there was a lot of different kinds of music that we were suddenly exposed to. And it wasn't just sort of classic rock radio anymore. Obviously, the music in the mid 80s, well, you guys reveal a lot of it and talk a lot about it, but there was so much like synth stuff and dancey stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so I felt suddenly like, wow, there's a lot to pick from. Now, looking back from now to there wasn't a lot to pick from, but it felt like there was. And so Born in the USA came out that June. I was 12 years old. I had just gotten out of 6th grade.
Okay.
And I it just blew my mind. Like all this stuff on MTV was awesome, but then along came this guy that I was vaguely familiar with just from the local radio. But this was the first time where, an entire work was presented to me and I had a couple of bucks for my paper route and I'm going to go buy this cassette. I've got Huey Lewis, I've got Prince,
yes.
But I'm going to go get this dude because I've already felt like maybe there was something there.
Now, were you already playing music? Were you playing music from a young age, or was Bruce sort of the impetus to that, the inspiration to, hey, you know what? I really like his music. I want to maybe learn how to play a couple of his songs. And then you start writing your own music.
Yeah. It's funny. I had never thought of that really, but it did coincide exactly with the time in my life when I began to at least pretend to play. So my brother is 2 years younger than me, Dave, and he ended up being a singer and guitar player in our band.
Okay.
And but he was more driven, I think, to begin to play the guitar and stuff. So he got the guitar first. So he must have been about 10. And it was that summer, because I do remember us sitting on my mom's front porch and I began to get really jealous that Dave was able to start to play the beginning of Glory Days and things like that. And, as an older brother, I was just ready to sabotage anything. And then I realized, well, instead of doing that, maybe I could take this other route where I could, force him to show me all that he was learning. And fortunately, that's the direction that we went.
Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so British DJ Roger Scott called Born in the USA a defiantly rock and roll album. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I like that because, again, you have to remember in the 1980s, I don't really know that much that would have qualified as rock and roll, historically speaking. There were still bands like the Stones and Elton John and people like that. And the music they were making was still rock and roll. But you also had these other genres that were beginning to branch off and rise up and become more prominently visible, and audible all over the world. So with Bruce, the funny thing is, I think that at times with the Born in the USA record, he tried to embrace some of those elements with synthesizers and things that he had in his work before, but like a lot of records that came through the mill of the 80s, sometimes I wonder if some of these artists went to bed one night and then one of the producers just got out the synth and was like, and put it all over the record. And they woke up the next day and was like, it's too late. We shipped it off. It's done.
More synth. Synth.
It just ended up in some strange places, but that was the time we were living in. So looking back now, I think that Bruce is pretty much rock and roll to the core,
Yeah.
I don't know how he would have shaken that even if he tried. At the same time, I think when you're sort of trying to put music on the radio in a big way at a time when it is, Culture Club and Flock of Seagulls.
Yes.
I think there was probably maybe an element of outside voice that said to him, you should consider this, but knowing what I know about Bruce, it was his decision in the end,
Right.
And he has all these incredible musicians. So I think that there's an element of even old fashioned protest music, especially to the title track, to My Hometown begins to sneak in there with things. There are themes that Bruce had touched upon to some degree, but I really do believe that, this was a record where everything that he had been orchestrating in his mind for a long time, this great American novel, so to speak, of his entire legacy. Born in the USA was the culmination of all of that.
That is the perfect way to describe that. This album is the great American novel. The dreams, the disappointment, the desire, the desperation, it's all there.
It is. And the funny thing is, a couple of his other records are the same. They sort of have that great American novel ethos to them as well, I think, anyway, But this one, even when you take Bruce's life, his own life, and I like to do that. If you know anything about an artist and you say, well, this guy was around 34, 35 years old. So that's the prime of your life in a lot of ways, It's probably the prime of your artistic life if you've been doing what you're doing for a while. Because
it's your glory days, if you will.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly, right? So he's this guy, and if Bruce at the time, from what he's written and said in interviews, he was kind of lost in a sense. I think he had chased his music and his vision for his work for so long that he found himself lost in the sense that he didn't feel rooted in one place. He didn't feel rooted with a family. He didn't necessarily feel good about all that he had even accomplished, and that's hard for so many of us to imagine, I think.
And I think it's probably easier for someone like a musician to imagine than a regular, person working a 9 to 5. I mean, that from your experience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you travel so much. It's a different stage every night. You wake up, where am I? You're always traveling. What time zone am I in? What do I really have that's keeping my feet on the ground? I need to be able to grow, but I can't grow unless I'm planted. But then, the nature of my work takes me everywhere. These are some difficult themes and struggles for people, for artists particularly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so looking at Bruce, in 1984, say he's 35 years old. I think in the 80s, that was an age of American transition. There was a legacy of, isn't it time you settle down? Isn't it time you got married? Aren't you going to have some kids? That kind of thing. Even if you're the biggest rock star in the world.
Right. Yeah. It's the midlife calling of it all, right?
I think so, and maybe for some people, they push that off enough to where it subsides, but unconsciously it probably eats away at them. And you could even argue, and we're going out on a limb, but it probably has destroyed some really good people at that level because they just absolutely refused to embrace that idea. And from what I understand about Bruce, I think Born in the USA not only represented this incredible breakthrough for him culturally and musically, he became, a zillionaire, who knows, but at the same time, I think it also became this breakthrough for him psychologically, where he understood that I'm not happy,
Right.
He's spoken openly about how he was very depressed at the time. And that was the first time that he really, opened his eyes to that. And essentially was curled up on the floor from what I've heard and was begging for help, And
he's been very open about his mental health journey and his path to healing and wellness and living a more centered life. And that, especially at that time, I mean, these were just things we didn't talk about, and particularly men didn't talk about. And so for Bruce to be the example, the ideal of masculinity, playing this, hard rock and roll music. And he was so successful to be open about his struggles. That helped a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, hearing him talk about that now, and I've experienced a lot of anxiety and depression in my own life. And there have been times when I can't even explain how important it has been for me to be able to sort of say, well, my absolute favorite musician of all time is on, 60 Minutes talking about that.
Yep.
I mean, that's a really, really important thing for me to be able to plug into, and a lot of people to hear it. So you're right. That's an incredible point is, I think at the time in the Born in the USA era, he wasn't as outspoken about it because it was new to him.
Sure.
But if you listen to certain lines of the record, particularly and I'm on fire and there's some stuff in there, Downbound Train. There's some lyrics in there that are very telltale, that it would indicate a guy who, is confused and is quite possibly hurting.
Right. Debbie Miller in 1984, she did a review of the album for Rolling Stone. And I really liked what she had to say. She said, his characters are born with their broken hearts, and the only thing that keeps them going is imagining that, as another line in another song goes, there's something happening somewhere. Though the characters are dying of longing for some sort of payoff from the American dream, Springsteen's exuberant voice and the swell of the music clues you that they haven't given up. So here, the characters in his songs, to the point that you were making, they all have broken hearts. They're all struggling in some way, but there's this glimmer of hope in them. In the chorus, Bruce, I read another article where Bruce is saying, like, the real joy is in the chorus. Like, the hard parts are in the lyrics of the song, but the chorus is where the joy is. And that's where the hope is in his music. Yeah. And you see that throughout this album. And listening to the album with this in mind, the characters haven't given up, but they are all still struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really astute. I like that.
Yeah.
I think too, like, I was reading an interview recently, or at least a quote, when he was talking about this record, and he was talking in particular about the song No Surrender. I never knew this, but he really didn't want to put the song on the record. And it exactly for the reason that you're saying. I think he began to think that maybe he was putting a little too much hope into the voice of his songs. And he very specifically said, these characters, these people in my songs are hopeful. And I'm paraphrasing now, obviously, but they are hopeful, but they're also really banged up from life, and
right.
and their daily lives are very difficult. And sometimes hope isn't enough. Sometimes hope isn't enough to carry over there. And so it's really cool that you mentioned that, because that brought this back to my mind. And I think that, again, it shows an artist at his peak who was still in the very throes of being as successful as anyone could be, still questioning whether his voice was too far this way or too far that way. Was he capturing what he really wanted to capture as well as he could? And of course, I think in retrospect, most of us would say he did. He did capture that. But I admire the fact that of an artist. It's the artist's torture, I guess, is just thinking that you're never quite there.
Right. I mean, in spite of the fact that this album obviously was a mega success, it went 15 times platinum. It sold over 30 million copies worldwide. It was the best-selling album of 1985. And out of the 12 tracks on the album, 7 of them became top 10 singles. I mean, more than half of the songs on the album. It's just incredible to consider. It was nominated for a Grammy for Record of the Year in 1985. It did not win, surprisingly, but it has gone on to be one of the best-selling albums of all time. Okay, there's 12 tracks on this album. Is it like a favorite child situation? Can you pull out one track that is your favorite?
It really is hard. I would have to say, if I had to pick one, it might be Bobby Jean.
Really?
Yeah, I really love that song. It does something to me. It makes me, when I listen to it in my car, I feel like I could push a button. I can't figure out what button yet, but that I could make my car fly.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, it just feels like that to me. And I don't know if that's a popular choice amongst Springsteen fans. Of course, they love to argue about what's best, but for me, that song really does it. And I also, back to your last point, I think it does capture a little bit of both sides of where he was coming from here, from a sad place and also from a somewhat hopeful place.
Right. So I had read, and I don't know if this is true, maybe you know better than I do, but I had read that this was about his longtime friendship with Steve Van Zandt, who had left the E Street Band prior to this album, correct?
That's right. He did. He produced the record.
Okay.
And then he left.
He left. So I know that he was invited back to be part of the Glory Days video. He's my absolute favorite part of that video. But have you heard that this song is about, their friendship and his heart hurting from that departure?
Yep, you're right. I have heard that.
Okay.
I've never heard it officially declared by the man himself. But I do. I love the song. And when I listen to it through that lens, I still love it. I still think it's really cool and very cool in a different way. It is quite possible. It's hard to imagine that Bruce wasn't wildly affected by losing one of his best friends in the world. But I've also always wondered how early, like it would have to be a chronological thing, with Bruce. He writes songs and stuff leading into a record. He probably had a lot of songs written, but did he have Bobby Jean written before the record, or when did Steve tell him, I'm not gonna?
Exactly. What's the timeline of events? We need to break this down. I had heard that the songs on this album were recorded in conjunction with all the music recorded for Nebraska. So it's like the Nebraska Born in the USA sessions, and they went on for like a couple of years. And so because Nebraska is such a different album, it's interesting to consider that both of the albums were recorded sort of at the same time, if you will.
Right. Yeah, no, you're right. I think there was a lot of overlap, and I even think there was overlap from prior to Nebraska was The River. And I've heard that some of the songs that ended up on Nebraska were even alive as demo recordings during The River. So he was, obviously at a point in his life where he was writing a lot of music and write a lot of songs, probably being really hard on himself as to what was going to work. And they're three very different records. The River, Nebraska, and Born in the USA are very different records, but very Bruce in their own fashion. So it was a hell of a run,
Oh, yeah.
No matter where those songs came from.
Definitely. My favorite song is Cover Me, which was actually written for Donna Summer. And I think the reason I like this song so much is it sounds very Stevie Ray Vaughan to me. Do you get that vibe from it?
I've never thought of that before, but that's very interesting. I really love Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Me too.
I'm a fan. Yeah, I can see that. There's a very intense lead guitar. It's like a comet through the whole song that you of just hanging off of, which is, that's a really interesting insight. I've never thought of that before, but I like it. Yeah.
Well, I had two thoughts when I was listening to the song. One was, wow, this reminds me of Stevie Ray Vaughan. The second one is, and these two bands are not at all similar, The Killers. This sounded very much like something The Killers would do.
Yeah, no.
Bruce actually collaborated with The Killers kind of recently. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, influences abound. So
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of favorite songs on this album. We're not going to talk about in too much detail, but My Hometown, which was actually the 7th single, that one just gets me right in my heart. What are your thoughts on that one?
Oh, it's an unbelievable song.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So like about 2 weeks ago, there was this exhibit in the Historical Society Museum in Monmouth County in Freehold, where Bruce was born.
Yes.
And it was called Springsteen, His Hometown. And they had like the little Tascam or TIAC, I forget what it is, 4-track recorder that he made Nebraska on. And all these different, like there was a giant scrapbook that Bruce's mom made throughout his career. It's like this big, looks like a Roman Catholic Bible. It's so huge. It's unbelievable. So my wife and I went to Freehold, and it was really the first time that either of us had ever spent any time there. So we came out of the exhibit, which was wonderful. And then we just started, it was hot as hell that day, but we just started to walk around and drive to different places and see all of the homes where he lived as a kid. And
I was going to ask you, because the picture on the single sleeve for My Hometown, for the single, has him standing outside the backyard of his old home at 39.5 Institute Street. I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
Have you been there?
I've been there. Yeah, it's really cool. And you wouldn't know, there's really not much in the way of like historical markers or anything, which I think is how Bruce wants it right now.
Okay.
These are just regular streets where people are continuing to live their lives. The only difference is that I think they get a lot of strangers walking
Sure.
around
Sure.
checking stuff
Did you
out.
encounter other people doing the same thing?
Well, we didn't encounter anyone doing that day, and
Okay.
it was very, very hot. I will say that. So,
Yeah.
but we did encounter some people that live like right next door to the tree that Bruce used to climb when he was a kid. He talks about it in his biography and stuff. And so it was just a really cool day. Like it was just. My wife is a huge Bruce fan as well,
Oh,
and so
awesome.
yeah, it was really a way for us to just like, I don't know, we didn't even have to talk half of the time. It was just like, can you believe that we're standing here? I know that's really nerdy.
No, it's not. It's an energy, right? So you were feeling the energy of the sort of the sacred space you were in.
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk about some of the music videos from this album. There were many. Did you go back and have a chance to watch them?
I did. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, let's talk about them.
Mhm.
So let's start with the title track, Born in the USA. In terms of the song, Steve Inskeep said on NPR's Morning Edition, maybe the meaning of Born in the USA is the distance between the grim verses and the joyous chorus. This kind of goes back to what we were talking about. It's the space between frustrating facts and fierce pride, the demand to push American reality a bit closer to our ideals.
Mm.
What do you think about that?
I think that's pretty insightful. I think it's along the same lines of, I don't know if you're familiar at all with the artist John Prine, who died last year from COVID, but he had a song called Your Flag Decal Won't Get You Into Heaven Anymore.
Ah.
And I always think that, and I don't know if Bruce knew that song, but I bet he did.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought of Born in the USA in a way, like just the words Born in the USA. It sounds like such a commercial, truck.
Doesn't it? It sounds like an F-150 or a Ram. Yeah, it sure does.
Or like a bumper sticker, like a
Yes.
on, and sure, you can have that bumper sticker, but you're driving your truck to work and to everywhere in your life, and the story is much deeper than just exploiting this saying per se. And maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but along what you're saying and the NPR quote, I do think that there's a really vital sort of dissonance between what Bruce is sometimes singing, and even in the image that he adopted during this record, of this kind of strong, muscular guy. He's a good looking. He's probably as best looking as he's ever been. And
Yeah,
suddenly,
I mean the Levi's, he's muscular, the bandana. I mean, it's a look,
yeah,
it's an energy.
it really is, and yet even this physical pinup-ness of
Yes.
Bruce Springsteen in 1984 is a result of something much darker. And that was his depression, where he's talked openly about, like, he began to lift weights to take his mind to a better place. And so I think that's, in a way, sort of metaphorical for what was happening with the record itself, is that, this Born in the USA, the title of the record, the sounds of many of the songs, the party atmosphere half of the time.
Yes.
And in some respects, and I know it's a stretch, but suddenly Bruce Springsteen was sort of like Captain America, kind of like a superhero standing in front of the U.S. flag and singing Born in the USA. And so, obviously a lot of people misinterpreted that, but I think it's important even now, 35, 37 years later, to recognize that while he was intentionally portraying, himself in sort of a, strong American regard, I think that was all to lure you in and to get you hooked and to force people who may have not even ever been forced before in their musical listening history to think long and hard about the subtext of all these songs on that record. And there's a dark thread running throughout Born in the USA. And I think Bruce's idea was to get, the masses, once he saw the possibility of having them turn their attention to him, he wasn't going to play it safe, and he wasn't going to blow his opportunity. And I think Born in the USA does that incredibly successfully, and even to this day, again, like people that are revisiting that record that maybe heard it as a 12-year-old now hear an entirely different piece of art that it transpires and transitions to this 2021, wonderfully.
While the lyrics are talking specifically about the Vietnam War, they're as relevant as ever in terms of the slice of American life and blue collar workers and economic opportunity. And here we are fighting this war. From the very first lyric, born in a dead man's town, this isn't the nationalistic song of pride that a lot of people thought that it was. And certainly, as a kid, I thought it was, I'm proud to be an American. That's what that meant to me. And there was an issue with Ronald Reagan. He thought it was of nationalistic spirit and American pride. And it really wasn't. Bruce called it a protest song. That's what it was.
And I think it's really, really vital and important to recognize that Bruce Springsteen is a really intelligent guy, and he's a really proud American. Bruce Springsteen recognizes, as do most intelligent artists or writers, whatever, that in order to be really proud of your country, you also have to question it at times. And you also have to put it under, the spotlight and look and dissect it and talk about that, what you find with other people. And that's the only way, obviously, to move forward and progress as a nation. And unfortunately, I think that there are lots of people that don't understand that way of thinking and that are immediately drawn to, again, the bumper sticker aspect of, say, a Born in the USA bumper sticker. And yeah, the ability to misinterpret something so drastically may have never been repeated since in the cultural canon. That was, it's still to this day, there are people that come out on stage, politicians or whatnot, trying to use Born in the USA. I think these days Springsteen will quickly shut them down. But the point being that they still, right, after all of the tumult and chaos that has come along with the misinterpretation, they still misinterpret it.
Yeah. And, in watching the video on YouTube, so this has been viewed over 59 million times. I always like to look at the YouTube comments to see what people are saying about it. And it was very interesting because someone said, when I was little watching this video, I used to wonder why he was mad singing this. 37 years later, now I know. And someone else said, Bruce was singing hard as hell. He meant this shit. And that was really what struck me. Bruce looks, like you said, like Captain America in this video. He's so handsome. He looks so rugged, but he is screaming. I mean, there's fire and passion and anger and frustration in his voice. And it does sort of run counter to the imagery that you're seeing when you look at the cover art. It's the title of the album. He's standing. You see his backside against the American flag, and you think this is an image of pride, and then that last shot, that sort of beauty shot at the end when he turns around and looks over his shoulder, like it's a sexy shot. And so you can kind of see why, if you're not listening to the lyrics and all you're really catching on to is the chorus, it's going to be misinterpreted.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. And to that point, this was a video that wasn't just on YouTube, and some people are watching it now. And then this was a video that was on MTV,
in constant rotation.
4 times an hour.
Exactly.
So that summer and all through that fall and into that winter, that tour rolled on, that record was in the charts, and Bruce was on the cover of all of the magazines.
Right.
That video, even as the other videos were rolled out, I don't know what order they came in, but the point is that video still got play. And so by the end of, a year later, June of 1985, Lord knows how many millions had seen that video millions of times.
Mm-hmm.
And so many probably had just had it stamped into their brain and hadn't watched it so closely. I mean, toward the end of the video, he's showing people that appear to be like an unemployment line.
Yes.
Probably my favorite image is he shows like a 57 Chevy or something, and it's got a for sale sign on the front window. It's a beautiful, almost flawless looking car, but someone's getting rid of it. You know, someone is handing it away. And it's metaphorical in that the good old days are for sale. They're gone.
Right. Yeah. And, in the video, we cut to Bruce performing on stage and then these slices of real American life. There's factory workers and oil refineries. And, we see a picture of the Castiles, Bruce's former band from 1964 to 1968. That was kind of cool to see. But, teens on motorcycles and a young couple getting ready for the prom. And it's sort of the American ideal of what it is to, fulfill the American dream, this happy-go-lucky American spirit cut against these people standing in the unemployment line, these images of war. And these are two sides of the same coin, but they're so completely opposite. They're so foiled to each other. How do we reconcile the space in between these two things? And that's what he's calling into question. There's a lot more under the surface here that we need to examine.
Exactly, Lori. That's exactly right. I think that Bruce was really saying, if you really are someone who loves your country, then you're going to take a good hard look at it beyond just putting a bumper sticker on your car.
Exactly. It's like the NPR quote says, the space between frustrating facts and fierce pride.
Yeah. It's especially remarkable to consider, again, nothing against the content of MTV, at this period of time, but there wasn't that much that was pushing the political envelope in their rotation, even if it wasn't completely overt.
Oh, 100%.
And so I think what Bruce did there, again, you have to tip your hat to him, a 35-year-old guy, understanding that he has this record label fully behind him, willing to pour all of their money into the campaign for his next record. And he's going out on a limb and he's saying some pretty provocative stuff about really taking a good hard look in the mirror as American people. And for those that missed it, they missed it, but those of us that got it eventually and even decades later, it resonates. And I think that's just incredibly powerful.
I do too. And in terms of, because this is so closely tied to the album cover art, let's talk about that for a minute. The cover art was shot by famed photographer Annie Leibovitz. Springsteen said, quote, "We had a flag on the cover because the first song was called Born in the U.S.A. And the theme of the record kind of follows from themes I've been writing about for at least the last 6 or 7 years. But the flag is a powerful image. And when you set that stuff loose, you don't know what's going to be done with it." Now, the cover wasn't without controversy. Some folks thought it looked as though Springsteen was urinating on the American flag. Have you heard of that?
I have heard of that. I have to honestly say that never crossed my mind in that hour, but I can see what they're saying. I don't think that's what he was after here, but I guess maybe if someone said that to him after it came out, he probably had a small heart attack.
Well, what he said, so it was unintentional. And he said, quote, "We took a lot of different types of pictures. And in the end, the picture of my ass looked better than the picture of my face. That's what went on the cover. I didn't have any secret message. I don't do that very much."
Exactly. There you go. I think that says it all.
Okay. So let's talk about Dancing in the Dark. So Dancing in the Dark has a lot of views on YouTube, not only because it's a super cool song, but because Courtney Cox, pre-Friends, is featured in the video. In terms of the song, it was written by Bruce when his co-producer, John Landau, came to him and said, "Bruce, we need a single." And according to Dave Marsh in Glory Days, Springsteen said, "Look, I've written like 70 songs. You want another one? You write it." And so he was frustrated, but he still managed to write the track overnight. And this song was so popular. What are your thoughts on this one?
I'm so glad that we're talking about this song because, well, first, I just want to say, as a Springsteen fan, and just like a fan of any huge artist, I think you tend to change your favorite songs or lyrics or shows sometimes a couple times in the course of the day. And I can honestly say, like, a while back when we were talking about my favorite song on the record, I mentioned Bobby Jean. And back then, an hour ago, it was my favorite song. But now that you've mentioned Dancing in the Dark, I think it's my favorite song on the record.
Really? Okay, because I thought it was going to be one of those songs that Springsteen fans are like, oh, like that's the poppy, popular, like glossy song of the album. I can't like that because, it's not really maybe true to Bruce. Like he wrote it under protest, like here's your single. I really thought you were going to be like, eh.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I really, really love that song. And I think it's a masterpiece. Dancing in the Dark, to me, lyrically, first and foremost, is really reminiscent of what Bruce was writing back in sort of like the Darkness on the Edge of Town era in 78. And it kind of encapsulates this guy who's really uncomfortable in his own skin, who's up in the middle of the night and is not sure what he's supposed to be doing in life. He wants to change his clothes, his hair, his face. Even at a young age, those lyrics really resonated with me. I wasn't like a super popular kid. When I was in 7th grade, I was kind of chunky and, girls didn't really like me. I was almost invisible. And Dancing in the Dark was maybe the first song that I heard off of this record that I could relate to just directly right off the bat. Even though I'm sure that if Bruce, if I told him that, he was like, it's not really about a 12-year-old fat kid. But,
You're like, but it was. But it was. To me in that moment, it was. Did you see the 2019 film Blinded by the Light?
I have not seen that. No, I've been wanting to.
Serge.
Yeah.
Okay, so I love this movie. I saw it in the theater, and this is the song. This is his first introduction to Bruce Springsteen. He pops that tape into his Walkman, and everything changes for him. It ignites his passion for Bruce Springsteen and ultimately changes his life. And the way it's filmed, it's done just beautifully. But yes, those lyrics, want to change my clothes, my hair, my face, and the idea that something is happening somewhere.
Yeah.
It's out there. Like, can I be part of it? Am I good enough?
Yeah.
And it's those questions and that desperation against this awesome tempo and upbeat music that you're just like, yes, I can. I find this song completely uplifting, and it makes me feel triumphant in its questioning.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, Laurie. I have, and again, maybe there are Springsteen fans that don't like it, but that comes with the territory. I think oftentimes anything that's slightly different or is a huge radio hit or whatever, you're going to have people dragging on it. But I've never looked at it like that. I always looked at it as really pushing, the artistic envelope for Bruce. It was different than anything he had ever done. It was obviously very timely at that time in the 80s. And it's just a great, great song that he's been doing it in his Broadway show. And it translates incredible to an acoustic version. It's haunting, and it's just beautiful, and it's an entirely different way.
Oh, I'll have to look that up. You're talking about Springsteen on Broadway?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was doing it there. Yeah, it's really worth seeing. Yep.
Okay. I love this song, and I love the video. I can't help it. Bruce looks like a snack in this video. He is so handsome. He's dancing. He doesn't have a guitar in front of him. He's just holding the mic. He looks great. And, this video was directed by Brian De Palma. Brian De Palma directed Scarface, The Untouchables, Mission Impossible, Carrie. I mean, he's no schlub. So yeah, it's just fantastic. And then, of course, he brings a then unknown Courtney Cox on stage to dance with them. It's a really fun video.
Yeah, it really is. And the whole Courtney Cox thing at the end is such a bizarre twist, like who would have ever dreamed, you know? It's just so weird and yet so right. It's such an American collision that you would never have expected.
Right. It's like here she is, you know, on this beloved, iconic television show, you know, that America just cannot get enough of all these years later with the boss, you know?
Yeah, it's really cool.
And a little bit of trivia. Apparently, this dance, the Courtney Cox, Bruce Springsteen dance, is actually the inspiration behind Carlton's infamous dance on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Is that right?
That's what I read. I mean, you know, the internet is never wrong, so it must be true if I read it online.
Right. I'll tell you, on this note for this song, there's a really, really magic video. And I don't know where it ever came from, but it appeared, and I think you can see it on YouTube now. And it's Bruce basically warming up and figuring out his moves for Dancing in the Dark for the video. He's in a small room. It looks like it could be like in New York City, like a vacant apartment or something. There's someone else filming him. It's unbelievable. And, you know, you see him very intimately, and it's kind of almost vulnerable because he's trying out something that, for the most part, I don't think he had done on stage before,
right?
You know, let alone in an MTV video that will be seen, you know, by zillions. So, yeah, if you Google like Dancing in the Dark, Bruce dancing, you know, the video comes in. It's just a whole movie, and it's awesome.
Oh, that's fantastic! I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to Google that, and I'm going to try to share that link in the show notes for folks to check out. Thanks for that. That's fun. I'm going to check that out. Someone said in the YouTube comments, it's almost impossible to believe I was at that show in June 1984 at the St. Paul Civic Center. Bruce played that song 3 times in a row to get all the footage he needed. He was so apologetic, and we didn't care. Like saying, like, we didn't care that he played it 3 times in a row. It was so great. Can you imagine being there? Oh,
no, I didn't even realize it was during the middle of an actual show. I thought it was sort of, oh, wow. It
was
insane.
real.
Oh, wow.
I know. Isn't that fantastic?
That really is.
It was so good. Okay. This leads us to I'm on Fire. Whoo. This video is like a film. You know, there's this whole scene that happens before the song ever begins. And we've got a very good looking Bruce Springsteen working as a mechanic, and a woman comes in. We never see her. He's under the car. So the only point of view we have is like, you know, we see a little bit of her legs and we see her feet. She drives in this vintage Thunderbird. She pulls in and she asks him if he can work on her car. And apparently she brings her car in regularly and she only wants him to work on it. And we never see her face. But she's like, you know, can you work on my car?
And we do see her wedding ring shining.
Yes, we see her wedding ring and her sexy legs and her heels. Yes. And he's like, yeah, you know, I can work on your car. I can bring it back to you. And she's like, oh, well, we, you know, the husband, we live up in the hills. So, you know, it's better if I just come get it. So this is how we start the video.
Right.
Now we see him lying in bed. It's nighttime. He's staring at the ceiling. And this is when the song begins. He sits up and he gets out of bed and he goes to the Thunderbird and he gets in it and he's driving. We see him arrive outside of her home, and it's a very fancy home, presumably like, I don't know, in the Hollywood Hills or something. That's what that looks like.
Yeah, exactly.
So the lights are on. He gets out of the car. And he goes to ring the doorbell, but he stops himself. And he decides instead he's going to put the keys in the mailbox. And then he proceeds to walk home. And she lives really far away. We already have learned this.
Right.
What are your thoughts on this?
Well,
so many thoughts on this.
Yeah, I just watched it with my wife for this podcast. And it had been a while since I'd seen it. So I really didn't even remember what was going to happen. And it had me kind of fascinated and even chuckling a little bit, because I think it is probably as close to an acting role as Bruce ever really attempted.
Okay.
I think it's an interesting video. It certainly to me, it seems to dictate that Bruce is walking up to the precipice of temptation and doing the right thing,
right?
Backing away, a good guy. So there's a good guy imagery that comes along with it. But then I said to my wife, I said, well, if he had actually rang the bell, there's a really good chance he would have got shot, because what are you doing here, right? She's married, and, I don't know. But so in reality, the whole thing seems a little bit funny to me. What do you think?
It's clear that there's sexual tension between these two people. We never get to see her face. We get to see his face when he's interacting with her. And of course, he looks absolutely smitten. But the fact that she's bringing her car week after week,
right?
There ain't nothing wrong with that car, Serge. That car is working just fine. We get the sense of a sexual tension between them. And it's a song really of desire. He's practically whispering this song. It's very, very different than a Born in the USA, where he's just screaming, right? So it's a whisper. Right. It's a short song. And I found myself wanting more. I wanted more of the story. I wanted more of the song. And I saw in the YouTube comments that someone said, this song is about wanting something you can't have. The song is short and you want more of it, but you can't have it, which is why you love it. The song is not too short. It's just right. If it were any longer, it would kill your desire. Sometimes wanting something is better than having it. If we had it, we'd just fuck it up anyway. You know you would. There are things in this world that are better off without us.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that. Was that a comment on YouTube?
Yes. I was like, ooh, a thoughtful comment.
I bet Bruce wrote that comment.
I hope that's true. No, it's true, because
it's so good.
I actually played it 2 more times just because I didn't feel satiated by the song. I was like, it's too short. Yeah. It's so beautiful. I want to hear it again. And so I listened to it 3 times, and then I was like, okay, yeah. But it's the same thing over and over again, because it never gets it wrong. It's always just right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm kind of in love with that notion and that theory. I don't think I had maybe ever embraced that on my own before for that song, but I do really like it. And now I also want to watch the video again. This idea, and in a very meta way, it's a pop song paying tribute to what makes pop songs wonderful, is that short, leave you wanting more kind of taste, and I don't know, that's a lot to wrap your head around, and I like it. I'm definitely going to revisit it again.
Yeah. And this idea of maybe the notion of something being better than what the reality could ever be. Maybe the daydream is where it should be left. We don't want Bruce to be a bad guy. We don't want him to break up a marriage. Of course, we don't want any of those things. But at the same time, maybe it's perfect in what it could never be.
Yeah, that's the truth. And that kind of ties in loosely to my boneheaded theory that if he had rang that bell, what's going to happen? Nothing good, right? I mean, maybe he doesn't get shot, but someone's life is going to get ripped apart, And so it is more than just a noble move. It's also quite possibly shifting the entire future. I don't know. I guess that's one you could sit and drink a whole bottle of wine and analyze, and it would be fun to do that, and I never thought of it like that before.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a long walk home. If he's presumably in the Hollywood Hills, that is his cold shower walking all the way back home. Yeah.
Yeah. You're definitely going to get, stopped by the police.
Yeah, it was a fun watch. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was. You're right.
This leads us to Glory Days. What are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I love this video. Again, it's sort of very E Street Band, which I think sometimes is lost in the whole presentation of the Born in the USA era, with the exception of the tour, when you would see the band live, like I'm on Fire, like we're just talking about, is just Bruce. You wouldn't even know he has a band. So this is a reverse of all of that. And it's definitely, in a sense, an homage to all these incredible musicians that he has played with for years. It's a bar band song. It's a bar band video.
Yes.
there's a little bit of loose narrative around it with the baseball thing, which is cool. But I think it works. It doesn't blow me away, but it definitely works.
I really enjoyed it. I mean, it felt really personal. And I think that's what I enjoyed so much about it. It's a party song. Everyone in the bar is having the best time. And there's this other side to him that's, he's a dad and playing baseball with his kid. And, it's shot around the local area there. And I just love sort of the hometown feel of it. That's like, you get this glossy magazine, Bruce, in some of these videos. But then you also get this real sort of like, I'm a regular guy who likes to enjoy, the American pastime. It's just all so American and wholesome, and it's family, and it's friends, and it's celebration, and it's nostalgia, and it's the glory days, thinking about the good old times. And what do those glory days mean as a dad too? I mean, you have one son in baseball or a couple of your kids in baseball?
Yeah, me personally, I have, I have both of my sons, and I also have a young stepson who's just turned 7, who's in baseball. Yeah, so we got almost a whole team.
That's so cool. So my son's in travel baseball also. And so I don't know, it's just that father-son connection of baseball, and particularly if you've grown up around baseball fields, and then just that, that other side of your life, just having a good time with your friends in a bar. I really enjoyed this video. And interestingly, this video actually has his first wife in it at the end and his second wife in it throughout.
Yeah, that's true. And you're right, and kind of reading between the lines, which I think, again, is for maybe the more advanced Bruce Springsteen fan who's interested in these things. Again, we have to remember this was this time in his life when he was really struggling to put down some roots.
Right.
He said this as much in interviews and stuff. He was really struggling to find his sense of self. He was really struggling to find a place within himself that he could maybe be a family man, after all these years of just running and gunning from town to town. And it's kind of interesting to see that imagery at the end, especially where he does have what appears to be a son, and he's playing baseball with his son, and his wife seems to pull up and honk the horn. Let's go, guys. Time to go to dinner. These are things that he didn't actually have yet.
It's almost like a manifestation of that life.
Yeah, like some foreshadowing.
Yeah.
And there she is playing the tambourine, the newest member, or one of the newest members, along with Nils Lofgren, Patty Scialfa, who he ended up marrying and having 3 kids with. Yeah. Right. So that angle of it, is behind the scenes, but it's really awesome to look back at that now and say, oh man, this guy, who knows if he was even, sometimes I see that video and I wonder, like, were he and Patty a thing yet? Like, was it happening?
I mean, was it a I'm on fire situation?
Yeah, I don't know.
Right? Like, we have questions, Bruce.
I don't know if we'll ever know, but one has to assume that, they went on a world tour that lasted like a year and a half. So somewhere in there was at least some kind of a look given from one to the other that was it's kind of romantic.
It is romantic. And this video really, this sort of mirrors your own life too, doesn't it? It's playing in bars and baseball with kids and the triumph and the roots. And it very closely resembles your experience, Serge.
Yeah, I think it resembles a lot of people's, but mine maybe in particular. I'll tell you this is funny that you say that, because the bar where the video was filmed is in Hoboken, New Jersey. It's called Maxwell's.
Yes.
It's a bar I've played with my band probably 10 times through the years.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, yeah, many times, and for the filming of the video, I think they maybe even made their own little stage. That room is legendary. It's gone now. Sadly, Maxwell's is gone now, I think. And I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it is gone. And it was a legendary, New York City area club where everybody from the Replacements to, Superchunk, just a ton of awesome bands played there through the years.
Oh, that's so interesting. And two, I mean, I touched on this earlier. Steve Van Zandt. I mean, we know Bruce is the star of this video, but really, he is so magnetic in this video. He is a one-man party.
Yeah, which again, like that's a good point because I often wonder this too. Like, was this filmed like after the record was made, after he said, I'm going? Because Nils Lofgren is on the stage as well. He's the new guitar player.
Okay.
So they're all there. This is like a goodbye to Steve Van Zandt, right?
So I think I don't know. I'm literally pulling this out of my ass. So I mean, feel free, audience, to tell me I'm completely wrong. But I think because the song is Glory Days, he's thinking about the greatest time maybe in his life as a musician with his band. And I had read that he had invited Steve Van Zandt to come and be part of the video. So sort of maybe as an homage to their time together. And Steve Van Zandt is having the actual best time. You know, I know him primarily as Silvio from The Sopranos. So this is a very different side to him than I'm used to seeing. He's just so damn happy to be there. And it's infectious. The song is infectious.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so you had mentioned Springsteen on Broadway, and that returned to the theater in June and ran through September. And Bruce has mentioned possibly touring again in 2022. So fingers crossed to that. And I wanted to ask you, so he's got a podcast called Renegades, Born in the USA, which is a series of conversations between President Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen. They talk about their lives, music, America. Have you listened?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I listen, with my wife together. We've heard every episode on different road trips, and it was even better than I could have possibly imagined. It's just really worth listening to. I don't know. Both of those guys are titans and giants in the cultural canon, in the world view, but it was really intriguing and kind of genuine, I think, to hear them speak with one another. They obviously like one another, and so there's a rapport there. It was famously spoofed on Saturday Night Live, the whole conversation between the two of those guys, because it's funny. But I honestly think it's worth listening to just to hear two really intelligent, good storytellers, shooting the shit.
Oh, sounds fun. And there's also a book that's going to be coming out. It's available for pre-sale. It's coming out on October 26, 2021. So all you diehard Springsteen and Obama fans, you can go and you can order that now. So
there you go.
So I want to tell our listeners about what you're doing because it's so cool. So you write a weekly newsletter about your life and times. It's called Thunder Pie, and it's published every Friday morning. And I'll put a link in the show notes to it, but you guys can find it at sergebielanko.substack.com. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you're doing there?
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks for asking. It's just been something that I really love to do is to write. I find it to be, again, kind of sounds cliche, but I find it to be really therapeutic. And since turning my attention from the band, last winter, I found myself in another dark spot. I have a wonderful family and incredible wife and awesome kids and stepkids. And yet I've just experienced a lot of, depression and anxiety in my life. And writing has been one of those things that kind of helps to pull me through. And I realized after I heard about this whole newsletter phenomenon that's been kind of happening the last few years. And I don't like the word newsletter. It just kind of sounds like, hey guys, dear everyone, we went to, the amusement park last week and here's a picture of the kids in their baseball uniform. It's not like that.
No, it's not like that.
No, it's not. Not yet anyway. Maybe ultimately that's what it ends up being. But I write an essay. Once a week. It keeps me writing. I've been fortunate enough to have, a collection of people that like my writing and that have followed me through the years, whether it's with the band or with other blogs or websites I was writing for. And it just means a lot to me to be able to have that opportunity. So yeah, I get to do it now once a week. I put out like 4, maybe 5 essays a month. There is a pay part of it. Some people subscribe and they get more, obviously, but then there's also a free subscription. So if you subscribe for free, I welcome you, and you'll get at least one free essay from me. I don't send more emails than that. I don't fill your email box or anything like that. So it has meant the world to me. And I like being able to do stuff where I'm independent, and I can do it on my own, by my own rules. So with the exception of, having the platform Substack, which has thus far been really awesome. It just feels like it's as much a project that's me as I could possibly hope for, on the eve of turning 50.
Yeah. And you had said that you write because writing helps you feel alive.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's very much the truth. And I know that sounds so lame in certain lights, but I find writing to be the most revelatory source for me to understand myself, if that makes any sense at all. Like
yes. Yes.
In the middle of going under, that's what I call it. If I dive into this place that I can get to, luckily so far I haven't had trouble doing that, but when I sit down and I begin to write, I often don't even know what I'm going to write about that day, and right. I just dive in and I lose myself in there, and it's awesome. I don't know, I've had nothing else like it, and it makes me feel alive, and that's why I do it. I probably do it more for me than anyone, but I'm really grateful that other people seem somewhat interested.
Serge, that really does come across in your writing, because I've written alongside of you for a few years. And I don't know if you know this, but there was a time I was actually your editor. I don't think I ever told you that.
I don't know that I did know that.
Yeah. So I am familiar with your writing, and it's a stream of consciousness that does not only belong to you. You're male, I'm female. We're from different parts of the country. You're a little bit older than me. Yes, we have things in common, but we also have a lot of things not in common. And yet I can tell you, every single time without fail, every time I read something from you, number one, I know in my bones that it's authentic. I feel it. Number two, I believe you. And number three, I feel like I'm there. And that's really a tremendous gift. And I think this is what the people who come to your writing can come to expect with consistency. I think that it's a place where people feel safe to maybe be a little more vulnerable in their own thoughts and in their own processing of emotion. And I find your writing to be really revolutionary in that way, because I don't get that from a lot of people, but I consistently get it from you. And so for you guys listening, I really do urge you to check out Serge's writing. You can also find more of his writing on his blog on sergebielanko.com. And I know you guys are going to connect to Serge, because everyone who does comes back for more, including me. So thank you for what you're giving to the world, because it's an incredible contribution.
Wow. Thank you, Lori. That I can't even begin to tell you how much that means to me. It really, really means a lot. And
it's all true. It really is all true, Serge. I mean it with my heart.
Thank you so very much. That you almost made me cry there.
Oh my God. No.
Yeah,
but I mean, you are an incredible giver of your art. And so, you were a musician for all of these years, and you're a writer who's been writing. Gosh, when did you start? You're like a very early blogger. You probably even wrote in journals long before you started writing online, correct?
Yeah, and that I wrote for the band had a website. Yeah, so that's where I really started, and I would just begin to sort of recount things that were happening to us out on the road on the band's website. And I really enjoyed it. I really liked doing that. So yeah, going back probably, 15 to 20 years is when I first got any kind of taste of that kind of writing. I had written songs prior to that, and that's a whole different animal, but
right.
I think this is my thing now is writing sort of this kind of prose stuff.
That's wonderful. And really, it really is a legacy to leave behind for your children. And it's a beautiful gift. So I really do urge you guys to check it out. I'll put all of Serge's links in the show notes. And why don't you, Serge, tell our listeners where they can find you on social media?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you can find me under my name on Facebook. I'm on Instagram as Bielanko. And that's about it for me on social media. I did try Twitter, but I just...
It's a dumpster fire. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. I know it's a place to be, but I just couldn't find a reason for me to be there.
Yeah, I hear you. So to wrap this up, Serge, I found another article from an interview you did with Country Stuff in 2019. And you said, "I've never strayed from Bruce Springsteen, and I never will, man. He has been the one constant throughout my life, and he has never fucking let me down."
There you go. Amen. I mean, I stand by that. I really feel that way, and I always will. I've stood outside the house where he grew up. I've stood on the stage with him. I've listened to his music by myself. I've listened to his music with the people that I love the most in this world. And through it all, I feel like he's a part of me in ways that I will never, ever be able to explain. And I don't need to explain. It's just, that's how it is.
That's just how it is. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being a guest on the pod. I'm so grateful that you came here to talk about the legend that is Bruce Springsteen.
Thank you so much, Lori. It was a great pleasure of mine. I really had fun. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And to you, Gen Xers, thank you so much for listening. I'd like to remind you to rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And you know what, you guys, be sure to tell your friends. You can find us on the web at theuntitledgenxpodcast.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at The Untitled Gen X Podcast. We hope you keep in touch, beautiful people. Bye.